So I'm presenting a scenario of a malunited intertrochanteric fracture. I would add few facts as we go along the journey of seeing this case, which would clarify how things present in a patient. So now, as in any other case, we would be basing our treatment on three things: history, examination, and management. Now, as already told, if you do your history and examination well, you've done things very well, meaning you've already done 60 to 70% of a good job. And the management is further divided into investigation and treatment. So the two small pics on the right side give you a bird's eye view on what we do in a history and an examination. Let me remind you about the anatomy of the hip joint. The top figure shows you the anterior and the posterior view, and you can see that posteriorly the capsule is not totally covering the neck of femur. So there is some area which is deficient. That is what produces non-union at times in intertrochanteric fractures, meaning if a line is oblique and is exiting posteriorly, it can have a neck femur component even in a trochanteric fracture. And the serial pictures on the lower down, you can see the various types of described trochanteric fractures. From left to right, there is an increasing degree of instability which is coming in, and as it is described in literature, the medial buttress caused by the lesser trochanter is one of the important factors which, if is broken, causes a varus. There is another factor that there are huge muscles attached to the shaft of the femur, both on the medial side and on the outer side, which pull the shaft upward. There is a weight of the limb which takes the whole of the lower limb outward in external rotation, and all these get together and create an unstable situation which causes a classical varus external rotation deformity. Another concept which has come in recently is the lateral wall. So we've talked about the medial wall. Another one is the lateral wall. If the lateral wall is too thin, it is one of the factors which contributes towards an unstable trochanteric fracture. Beyond these would be the reverse obliquity ones and the transverse ones, and the ones which extend into the subtrochanteric area. They are adding on to the instability within this fracture. So when the amount of instability increases, the probability of malunion increases. So let's get on to the job, history. Now we start with the patient profile as already described. There is a mnemonic with the name of NASORMA, meaning name, age, sex, occupation, residence, marital status, and when was the patient admitted with you. So all this tells you about the background of a patient, what could be the causative issues in the patient, and how you're going to manage him later on after giving him treatment. The presenting complaints, you need to know the onset, the duration, and the progress. And the two main presenting features in a malunited trochanteric fracture would be a limp, and the second one may or may not be a pain. So the usual complaints in a malunited trochanteric fractures are a deformity or a limb shortening. There may or may not be some amount of limitation of movements. There might be inability or difficulty of bearing weight. Pain may or may not be there. There might be some amount of swelling which might the patient complain on the outer aspect of the upper thigh, and definitely the gait of the patient changes from what he had before injury, and that is what he describes as a limp. Now that limp could be unaided or aided, meaning that he might be using some walking aid for moving around, or he would be walking without any aid. So we need to know about the onset, the duration, and the progress of each symptom in chronology, and then describe the history of presenting complaint. I will come to few classical examples in my subsequent slides. We definitely need to know the pre-injury status, which has a bearing on making the diagnosis as well as deciding what could be the treatment. We want to know the mode of injury, whether it is a low energy trauma or a high energy trauma. And in a malunited trochanteric fracture scenario, the treatment history is pretty important. Negative history we've already talked about. So if there is pain, now in a classical malunion, there would be no pain. So what is malunion? It is a scenario where there is a faulty or a fracture which unites in an inadequate, inappropriate way. So there should not be any pain. However, there could be scenarios in which due to the malunion and consequences of the malunion, there is pain. So what could be the cause of pain? It could be bony impingement, it could be soft tissue impingement, it could be fatigue due to the inefficient abductor lever arm. It could be secondary changes coming into the hip joint because of the changed biomechanics of the proximal femur, like degenerative arthritis could start, or at times even avascular necrosis could set in. So if the patient has pain, you need certain extra things to be detailed. The site of the pain, classically in a hip pain, the patient will point towards the anterior side of the groin or slightly on the side of the groin. You need to describe the character, the intensity and the radiation. If there is pain in a trochanteric malunion, invariably it is a mechanical pain, meaning it is going to be dull, it is not going to be throbbing or very severe. It could be activity related. There could be some amount of gelling when a patient sits for too long. There could be radiation towards the medial aspect of knee. So if there is pain, you need to go further into pain, because hip examination is like mathematics. If there is a symptom or a sign, it needs to be evaluated completely to complete the puzzle. So let's see a few case scenarios. A 60-year-old female slipped at home, could not get up, had to be lifted and taken to bed due to pain in the left hip. Now this patient could not walk for 8 weeks, was in bed and started walking with a walker after 2 months as pain decreased. He presented to us at the end of 1 year of this injury as a painless limp with shortening of the limb, but can still ambulate with a walking stick. So now you can see I have described the patient mode of injury. Was it a significant trauma? This is a very, very important question asked all the time. What is the definition of a significant trauma? That means after the injury, the patient could not walk. He had to be lifted and taken, and beyond that, he could not carry on his activity of daily living as he was before injury. You need to describe, you need to come out with a progress in time, and then the presenting complaint could be of various types. One I have told you is a painless limp, and the patient is ambulating with a walker or a stick. The second scenario could be everything same. Again, it is 1 year end, but there is a painful limp with shortening of the limb, but he can still walk around with a stick. So now this patient probably is more demanding than the previous one. He is come to you in the OPD because there is some disability which is coming in due to pain which has disappeared earlier but now again appeared. Now both the previous patients did not get any treatment, so they will come into the category of neglected trauma. Now the same patient, if he got treatment with surgery and started ambulating with a walking aid gradually and gradually left his walking aid, and he comes to you at the end of 1 year with a painless limb with shortening of the limb and can walk around with a walker or a walking stick. So this is another scenario where treatment has been taken, however the patient complains of a painless limb. Another scenario, same treatment taken, but he comes with a painful scenario. So now these two categories could fit into a failed treatment. That means although the patient was given treatment for his problem, but he comes back after 1 year with a disability, signifying that there is a failed treatment. So to summarize these multiple type of scenarios which can happen with a malunited trochanteric fracture, it could be an old age patient. I am trying to emphasize that there might be a bimodal distribution. I am not talking about pediatric fractures, and they can occur in pediatric age group also, but we are discussing adult patients right now. So there is a bimodal distribution, meaning that these are fractures of the old age. They could present with painless limp or painful limp. They could present with history of treatment or history of no treatment. So they could have a presentation at 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and they would fall into different categories as described earlier, into neglected, delayed, or failed treatment. Now, as emphasized earlier in negative history, whenever you have a patient who is old age, you need to look into the comorbidities, which could be general or specific. Meaning you want to rule out any causes which could have caused this fracture, or you want to look at any other problems the patient has which can affect the outcome when he is given treatment. So the next bimodal distribution, it could be a young adult. Now the old age patients are invariably low energy trauma, and the young patients are invariably high energy trauma. It could be a fall from a tree, it could be a road traffic accident. Again, the scenarios could be similar. Painless limp or painful limp, treated or untreated, and the timelines accordingly. Now in a young patient, you are bound to look at other injuries. Because why should a young patient not get treatment? Lockdown could be one of the reasons, but then there could be that the patient had a severe head injury for which he could not be given the most appropriate treatment which was required, so his hip fracture got neglected. At the end of the history, you again need to end up with a assessment of functional disability, which if you divide it into sitting, walking, what has happened to his occupation, and any specific activity of daily living you think was important in this patient, or the patient comes out himself. In sitting, both squatting and sitting cross-legged is important. It gives you about some idea about what is the level of disability in this patient. So now your history is completed, and you should be ready with this question. Your examiner would interrupt you and ask you what is your provisional diagnosis. So if the patient had pain, it is an easier provisional diagnosis. It will move towards a post-traumatic arthritis. But if the patient has a painless limp, it becomes a difficult provisional diagnosis to spell out, and you need to practice this, and this is one of the suggested ways in which you can present a painless limp in a malunited trochanteric fracture, only based on history. Mind you, this is only based on history. You have only completed your history. So based on history, it is a case of neglected trauma of the left hip region leading to limb length discrepancy in a 60-year-old female. Further examination is required to ascertain the condition more precisely and decisively, because it is very difficult with just the history points to pinpoint towards what could be your actual anatomical diagnosis. But you need to be ready with this statement, because this is a standard protocol. At the end of the history, you are asked about your provisional diagnosis. So obviously, if it is such a scenario, you are going to get away from the question of a differential diagnosis at this point of time, at the end of the history. So now we'll run through the important points of examination in a malunited trochanteric fracture. Most of you should make a habit of creating a performa of examination of whichever region you are, so that you don't miss out anything and you follow a particular sequence. So as in any other case of a hip examination, you will do examination standing. So standing and sitting, you need to describe things which are possible only on standing and sitting. And the important points would be the level of the anterior superior iliac spine, the knee, and the ankle. Now in a trochanteric fracture, you know there is going to be a short limb. So be careful how the patient is standing. In examination, when you are presenting a case, at times the patient stands with an equinus, At times he is standing with a flat foot, at times with a flexion of the knee of the normal side. So please describe what is visible when you're presenting it during your presentation. If there is pain and there is an adduction deformity, your anterior superior iliac spine could be at different level during standing, and if the patient is standing with a flat foot, your anterior superior iliac spine would be at a different level. From the side, the lumbar lordosis can be commented upon. From behind, you need to comment upon the scoliosis, the posterior iliac spine, and the gluteal wasting and the gluteal fold asymmetry. As you can see in the two pictures shown on the side, you need to be very vigilant about the things you are looking at. If there is a scoliosis, there is a subtle deep crease in the torso on one side, the torso upper limb distance is different on the two sides, and positioning of the limb is different. So you need to inspect all three regions, the hip region, the knee region and the ankle region, because you know in a malunited trochanteric fracture there is going to be shortening, and you need to describe how the patient is standing. A gait would have either a short limb plus Trendelenburg or short limb Trendelenburg with an antalgic component. So it is going to be a complex gait, and a classical thing which might be there is an out-toeing. Because of a severe external rotation malunion, the patient could be walking with a severe out-toeing. So if it is there, you need to be describing it, and when you present a case, please make all your markings. If you have marked your spine, if you marked your posterior spine, the examiner gets the message that you have done it. So if there was scoliosis on standing, you have to definitely do a sitting test whether it disappears or not, and then move ahead to the examination on supine position. The first part would be inspection. You look for exaggerated lumbar lordosis. More often than not, it is not there in such cases. Level of ASIS, if there is an adduction deformity, it could be higher. If there is only limb-length discrepancy, it will be at same level. Any fullness in the Scarpa's triangle. Be very careful about scars. Now, what we are observing is that you will get more and more cases in the exam in which already surgical intervention would have been done. So if there is a scar and you have not described in inspection, you have done a major miss. So you need to look for a scar for a PFN or a DHS, and be very careful. If the patient has been managed by conservative treatment, you have described in the history, and you have not looked for a scar for the upper tibial Steinmann pin. So these are important points of observation which you need to bring out. Wasting, if it is there, it is glaring and you should not miss out. It needs to be conveyed. Level of the knee and the malleoli and the attitude of the limb, and I had told you before, there will be severe out-toeing. It is said that the out-toeing is much more, if you compare it with a fractured neck femur, it will be more in trochanteric fractures than in a fractured neck of femur. So classical wasting, you cannot miss this out. If you miss this out, it's a problem. And there is a peculiar type of an abnormal shape of the proximal thigh. If you can observe in this patient, the proximal thigh is more outward and prominent in the upper part, which is due to the malunited varus orientation of the proximal femur. Palpation, you again look for the level of the ASIS. In obese patients, at times it is not very well visible, both the ASIS and the medial malleus. So you reconfirm your findings of inspection. The first two things you do are local temperature and tenderness, and this tells you whether you are dealing with an acute condition or not. That tells you how gentle you need to be in the further examination. So this point was discussed earlier also about tenderness. Now tenderness could be there if there are secondary changes which have started due to the altered biomechanics, if arthritis has started, or if there is surgical intervention which has been done in patient and there is some implant failure happening, there is some intra-articular migration of a screw or something. If there is a subtle infection inside, that could be a cause of pain. And in non-union scenarios, like in fracture neck femur, due to repeated upward and downward movement of the trochanter, at times there could be repeated minimal trauma and synovitis there, which can produce tenderness on anterior hip joint tenderness evaluation. Vascular sign of Nairath is going to be negative, and it is very important to look at the trochanter. Now, in a malunited trochanteric fracture, probably evaluation of the trochanter in inspection palpation is very important. How do you localize the trochanter? You palpate the shaft of the femur. How do you palpate the shaft of the femur? You gently roll the lower limb and feel where the femur is, and then gradually go upwards, and you will feel a bony prominence starting, which is the trochanteric area. So that is one of the ways to localize trochanter. And once you've done that, you start looking at the other features. The first thing would be tenderness. As I told, if the patient is between 3 to 6 weeks, the patient could still be tender. And if it is not tender, you know that it's a very well consolidated malunion. You need to palpate the surface. There would be irregularity of the surface in a classical trochanteric fracture. You need to palpate the trochanter in the antero-posterior direction and compare it with the normal side. So the thumb on the anterior side and of fingers on the posterior side gives you an idea on the width, the antero-posterior width of the trochanter, and you can easily make out a difference when you compare it with the normal side, both on the surface as well as on the widening. There can be another type of widening which is on the medial lateral aspect, which is very, very difficult to assess on clinical evaluation. One indirect way could be the Morris test, but then the Coxa-Vara also contributes towards a positive increased length in a Morris test. We will do the digital Bryant triangle to give you an estimate at the time of palpation on a proximal migration of the trochanter. That's the way how you palpate the trochanter. And you can see there are scars. So if there are scars and you have missed them out, it's a major miss. You marked your 3 points. Now the 3 points, 2 are bony points and 1 is an imaginary point. So it gives you an idea. You compare it with the normal side. And once you finish your palpation, you next move on to deformity evaluation in sagittal, coronal and rotational plane. There might not be a sagittal plane deformity. A maximum there could be a minimal amount of a flexion deformity due to secondary changes in the hip. There would be a coronal plane deformity, which you have already been told how to evaluate. An adduction deformity is one of the associated deformity. And you have malunion in various grades of external rotation. So you should practice evaluation of rotational deformity in extension, in flexion. Prone evaluation is a very nice way of evaluation because you can easily evaluate both the limbs at the same time. So do practice this part in a prone evaluation, because in hip you invariably forget what all things can be done in the prone evaluation. So once you mark your deformities, then comes the range of movement. Invariably the flexion extension would be okay. There could be some limitation of extreme flexion because of bony impingement, because of the varus position. The classical restriction is an abduction because of the Coxa-Vara, and then the trochanter is malunited in external rotation, and both the internal and external rotation could be limited at times. So please, when you do your movements, it is not a bad idea to request the patient to do it for you first, and then you do it on the normal side, and then you come to the abnormal side, and always be very watchful about any spasm or capitus being elicited. This would be very important when a pain is associated, any surgical intervention is done, you're expecting maybe arthritic changes happening, or there is an implant inside which could be migrating in the joint. So you need to be very watchful about the crepitus and the spasm. So if there is a deformity associated, the way of describing is 10 degrees adduction deformity with further 30 degree of adduction possible on the involved side. and remember the deformities which are there in a trochanteric fracture. Once you've done your deformities, you do your apparent and your true measurements, and it is a nice thing to convey whether there is a shortening or not. Meaning you need to say either there is 4 centimeters of shortening and there is no difference between the true and the apparent. The second scenario could be there is a shortening but there is a difference in the apparent and the true shortening, meaning that the apparent shortening is 5 centimeters and the true shortening is 4 centimeters, signifying that there is a coronal plane adduction deformities. At times the students go on describing the length 80 centimeter on the right side and 79 centimeter on the left side, and they do it for the apparent and the true, and then it gets a bit confusing. So it's not a bad idea to share the shortening and whether there is a difference between apparent and true. And for measuring of the true shortenings, you need to square the limbs, and the second prerequisite is both the limbs need to be measured in the same position. So again reminding you, don't forget posterior prone position evaluation. In a malunited trochanteric fracture, the only positive thing could be a gluteal wasting. The only good thing you could pick up is evaluation of an extension, reconfirming there is no flexion deformity. So special tests or other tests which help you at the end on coming and concluding your diagnosis. I have marked telescoping as first because this straight away takes you away from a non-union. So if telescoping is present, it takes you away from a non-union, it takes you away from a neglected posterior dislocation of the hip. Now Trendelenburg test, a classic malunion of the trochanter, there will be a positive Trendelenburg test. However, if there is an adduction deformity, that means there is a coronal plane deformity, the abduction is not possible. So there would be a fallacy in the Trendelenburg test, and you have to come out in the exam that since there was an adduction deformity, I have not done the Trendelenburg test. This is one of the reasons few of the examiners expect the Trendelenburg test to be done at the end as a part of the special test, and because by the time you have completed your evaluation, you have an idea of coronal plane deformity and you don't get entrapped into fallacies. The Craig's test is for anteversion. Now in trochanteric fracture there is severe external rotation malunion, so the anteversion will have a hit, but you need rotations to be possible to test this. Active SLR is a very, very important movement to be tested, because active SLR, if it is present, takes away pathologies in which the fulcrum is broken. So which are those pathologies? Fracture neck femur, posterior dislocation hip. So two classical examples which are taken away. And this active SLR is a confident active SLR and easily done till 70 degrees. So re-emphasizing the Bryant's triangle, the trochanter goes down posteriorly and proximally, so the base will get shortened. It is a good idea to measure it on both the sides, and both the perpendicular and the hypotenuse would increase. The Shoemaker line, important measurement again. So as you can see in the schematic diagram, the dotted line is showing when a coxa vara happens. So the line will intersect below the umbilicus and on the opposite side. The Nelaton's line are done in a lateral position with a flexion of the hip, and the tip of the trochanter goes proximal to the Nelaton's line. And re-emphasizing, the measurements have to be done when they are true measurements by squaring the pelvis and putting the limb in a similar position. So if you have to summarize, a malunited trochanteric fracture, on inspection there is an externally rotated lower limb, almost the outer aspect of the foot touching the bed. There is a short limb which is a significant shortening, could be of the range of 4 to 5 centimeter. There is a prominence in the upper lateral thigh. If it is an old case of a 1 year duration, there would be wasting. Palpation will come out with broadening, irregularity of the trochanter and proximal migration. Movements, there would be decreased abduction, external rotation and extension, and active SLR is positive, telescoping is negative. Invariably, it is a supratrochanteric shortening. The Bryant's triangle is classical, and in a classical malunion, the Trendelenburg test should be positive. So, at the end of the history and the examination, now you will pull in all the data that you have collected, and if it's a pure malunited, non-complicated case, a nice way to frame the diagnosis would be a neglected, malunited intertrochanteric fracture of the left side in a 60-year-old female with 10-degree adduction deformity, 4 cm true shortening, and no neurovascular deficit. As we have been taught, there has to be all the components in a diagnosis: the anatomy, the etiology, and the pathology. The next question immediately: do you have a differential diagnosis? If there is a surgical intervention, everything gets changed. So if your history and your signs are not fitting in, and it is a surgically intervened case, even a non-united fracture neck of femur will fall into a differential diagnosis. If it is a painful hip, again a secondary traumatic arthritis fits into, and there is a huge list on that. However, if it is a plain and simple malunited trochanteric fracture, you still need to have certain things in your mind. It could be rarely a malunited subtrochanteric fracture or a cervicotrochanteric fracture, both of which could come into a term like a pertrochanteric fracture. There could be a case of a congenital or acquired coxa vara whose history of fall was insignificant, and he's come to you after a few years. So you need to look at all those diagnoses in your mind. So just don't be very blank with what else could be, because classically what the patient is presenting you is an altered proximal femoral anatomy. To try to rethink all the causes from congenital to developmental to post-infective to a classical fibrous dysplasia, an osteomalacia, a Paget's, or just a trochanteric giant cell tumor. So if a differential diagnosis is asked, be ready with it and fit it as your patient comes in. So you would be asked what a coxa vara is, because the whole anatomy in this patient is a coxa vara. So when you're born, your neck shaft angle is around 160, and gradually it settles down between 120 and 135. Anything below 120 is coxa vara, and different books says different. Anything more than 135 or 140 is a coxa valga. So management, 2 parts: investigation and treatment. I'll be very brief here because it has been covered, most of it. So investigation, whenever you are asked, straight away go to X-ray pelvis with both hips and a left hip lateral view. So the next thing is, okay, put up the X-ray. While somebody is looking for the X-ray, you might be asked why an X-ray. So the clear answer is to confirm my diagnosis. Anything else? Yes. Look for the status of bone quality, the joint, the head, the status of the fracture union, any other pathology as a cause which is underlying, any implant placed due to previous surgery. And then this set of questions could end with a question, if the X-ray is lost and it cannot be traced, okay, what is expected? What do you think will be seen in this patient? So please imagine before you come to your presentation that with your history and examination and your provisional diagnosis, what are you expecting in the X-ray? So now here is the X-ray. So whenever X-ray is put up, please take a pause. Please look at it completely and then start describing. The classical way is from periphery to center. So if you have to describe this X-ray, this is an X-ray with pelvis with both hips. The upper part of the pelvis is not completely visible. The exposure is adequate. The pelvis is in an oblique situation, meaning it is not placed in a proper situation for an X-ray. This is important to convey, because if a patient is tilted and oblique, certain signs could come up like an unequal obturator foramen seen in this patient. So this is important to say. And then you can start with the iliac crest. The supraacetabular bone quality is comparable. The joint line is less clear as compared to the opposite side. It is a bit fuzzy. The head is resorbed and half the size of the other side, and it is irregular. The neck is foreshortened and it is very close to the tip of the trochanter. The trochanteric size is less. The lesser trochanter cannot be made out. There is a gap between the medial neck and the teardrop. The lesser trochanter, whatever is visible, is too close to the ischial tuberosity. The shaft is not visible on the outer aspect because of an implant, a dynamic hip screw, which has collapsed a bit, and it is also intra-articular. It is fixed to the shaft with 4 screws. So we need to practice describing the X-rays. And another scenario, a neglected traumatic malunited trochanter with a degenerative hip. You can have another scenario where surgical interventions have been done, but the hip joint is okay. So few words, last 2-3 slides about what the treatment could be. Now the treatment could be depending upon the age of the patient and the disability of the patient. If it is a painless limp with a 2 centimeter shortening in a 75-year-old patient who has reached to his pre-injury mobility inside his house, I would reassure him and maybe give him some amount of a shoe raise if it is acceptable to him, and recall him for a re-evaluation after a few weeks. Now the other scenario could be that there is too much of a limp, it is coming into the activity of daily living and it is fatiguing him, there is a lot of shortening. So if it is a young patient, you want to see whether a re-osteosynthesis is possible. There are times, as I have seen in these 2 cases, there is a possibility of a re-osteosynthesis, or the classical answer is a valgus osteotomy, as is also a solution to a ununited fracture neck femur. In an elderly patient, or if the joint has got damaged or the head has got resorbed, a replacement arthroplasty is a solution. The second scenario, which is going to be there in your exam, is an already intervened patient with an implant inside. So in such scenario, please do not forget infection, which could be a cause of a problem. So you need to keep it in mind. You need to add investigations pre-operatively, the blood markers, to pick up any investigation, any infection, and then it needs to go through an algorithm in which, if you suspect infection, you have a 2-stage procedure where you do implant removal, debridement and antibiotic bead, or if you don't suspect that, you look at the head, if it is destroyed or it is saved, and you have 3 main options. Either you replace or you preserve the hip. If you have to preserve the hip, you have 2 possibilities. You might have a possibility of a refixation, or you might have a requirement of an osteotomy. So what happens in a coxa vara? Since the trochanter moves up, neck shaft angle decreases, the biomechanics are changed. So what you do in an osteotomy, you try to take out a wedge from the outer aspect and recreate the anatomy. So depending upon the amount of wedge you take and lateralize the shaft you do, you will gain length in the same procedure. So now osteotomy is another seminar and symposium in itself. We cannot cover it here, but malunited trochanter is a scenario in which you are specifically correcting the biomechanics of the hip. So you need to start getting into the practice of drawing diagrams, making tracings, cutting them. So if we draw our tracings, do our cuttings, and if we have 100% X-ray, you can actually use your implant and superimpose and see what's happening. So to summarize, your case needs to be evaluated on the pillars of history and examination. If you've done them well, you're almost there in doing a good management of the patient. Thank you very much.